Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to the Stack Show. I am looking at the conference championships this week. We got a two-game slate with the conference championships, and there's a lot of situation with the wide receivers, running backs, where there's a lot of uncertainty with those players and who might get the bulk of the work for a lot of these teams. And I'm going to get into that after this. What's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching the Stack Show. Today, we're going to be looking at the two-game slate for the conference championships. We got the Detroit Lions versus San Francisco 49ers, and we got the Baltimore Ravens versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Should be a couple good games, and it is a lot of teams where they don't necessarily have, well, maybe the Chiefs have more of a condensed offense recently, but a lot of these offenses target a variety of wide receivers, and they have a variety of running backs to turn to. So it's going to be an interesting game as far as interesting slate as far as trying to determine which guys to target when there isn't anyone that really stands out from the wide receiver standpoint. And running back, there's a couple running back situations where they have more of a workhorse role, like Isiah Pacheco or whatever, but Pacheco doesn't really have the greatest matchup. So we can dig into some of these matchups and figure out where the ownership's going to be and where we can get a little bit different, because I think this is the type of slate where people make assumptions, and those assumptions aren't going to be necessarily locked in because of the way that a lot of these offenses function. So we have an opportunity to get a little bit different there without sacrificing much upside. And before I get into all those analysis, make sure to hit like on the video. Looking for about 15 likes. Don't know if I'll be able to put out a short video for the two-game slate, but I will be able to put out short videos for the game scripts shows. And I did both the game scripts for these games already. They're up on the YouTube page. Subscribe to the YouTube page. I'm at about 450 subscribers right now. I'm looking for 500 before the end of the season, so help me out there. And like I said, hit the like button. If I get to 15 likes, then I'll get some shorter videos out for those game script episodes, and those you can actually use in the two-game slate as well, because it gives you an idea of the players that I am looking at and targeting. So also make sure to subscribe, sign up for Underdog. If you sign up for Underdog using the promo code SEEK, they're going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit, and you're going to want to do that. I'll put out an Underdog show too. Take a look at some of the snake drafts that they do for the championship round, and they got some good tournaments going on there as well. So sign up using the promo code SEEK, and they will match you up to $100 on your first deposit. This week will be the same as last week. I'll go through the player pool in an optimizer. Did pretty well with that last week, nailed a few of those projections, and we will go in there and kind of adjust based on where we see the matchup advantages and stuff like that. So let's get into that. Going to take a look at the same way that we did last time. I'm going to exclude all. We're going to go into our excluded players, and we're going to kind of work in who we think is going to do well this week. So we'll start off with the quarterback position. I'm looking at Lamar Jackson is probably my favorite guy. Mahomes, I'm not super interested in Mahomes, but I'm going to leave him in the pool, and we'll see if the optimizer takes us there. Brock Purdy and Jared Goff, I'm going to just put them all in there. I'm not going to use all of them, but we'll adjust the projections like I did last time and see where it takes us. Christian McCaffrey's an obvious one to keep in the player pool. Same with Pacheco and Gibbs and Montgomery and Edwards and Hill. I don't think I want to go too much lower than that, because I think we can get enough of an ownership advantage with the guys, the main running backs there, since there's so many dual running back backfields this week. I like AMON-RA. Well, I don't like him this week, but we're not going to take him out of our player pool. Going to keep Debo in there. Going to keep Ayuk in there. Rice in there. Flowers. Not going with Jennings. I'll keep Beckham in there. I'm going to keep Reynolds in there. I'm going to keep Aguilar in there. I'm going to keep Williams in there. Bateman. Don't like Valdez-Scantling this week. I don't really like any of the Kansas City scrubby guys. I don't think we need to go there this week. We got enough value on other teams that get more targets. And I don't really see anyone else that I like for the rest of that. Let's see. We'll take a look now at the tight ends. Tight end's probably my favorite position this week, but I think it's going to be a lot of people's favorite position this week. So let's get Kelce. Let's get Laporta. Let's get Kittle, and let's get Andrews and Likely in there. Not really going to go much lower than that. I don't think we need to. So as far as the defenses, we can get all the defenses in there as well. No reason to fade any of those. And let's go to our player pool. So we have 29 players in the player pool, and kind of break down these games a little bit. Kansas City at Baltimore is going to be a game. Looks like it's got a 44.5 point total with the Baltimore as 3.5 point favorites in that one. Detroit is going to be a, let's see, that's going to be a 51.5 point total with, looks like San Francisco are now 7.5 point favorites. I'm guessing that Debo kind of jack that up a little bit in favor of San Francisco. So huge spread in that San Francisco game now, given the offense of Detroit. The situation, I'll just cover this game first. So let's go into the San Francisco-Detroit game. The spread is pretty wide, and there's a variety of reasons for that. One of the main ones is the way that Goff is not in a really good matchup this week, because San Francisco does really well at defending the middle of the field. And Jared Goff, that's his favorite place to throw. That's where he has the most success. And he is, more, he's not as lean. He doesn't lean as heavy on passing outside, which is where San Francisco's weaknesses are. So he's got his best weapon is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's an inside slot receiver, and San Francisco does their best defense against slots. On top of that, if you look a little bit deeper into the matchup, the 49ers defense pressures the quarterback at a 31% rate, which is pretty high. And Jared Goff has a 44% completion percentage against pressure. So that's a strike against Goff right there. As far as under pressure, he has 3 touchdowns to 7 interceptions, which is not good. His blitz completion percentage is 64.5%. And the 49ers, they only blitz at a 21% rate. So they're not blitzing a ton. So that doesn't really impact Goff there. But some problems with Goff under pressure. So he's not very good under pressure. And on top of that, San Francisco defends really well Jared Goff's favorite part of the field. So a little bit of things working against Jared Goff this week, and that would justify having a, like a lower expectation out of Goff this week. So not super high on Goff this week. You can see some of the games where he struggled in the past. He struggled against the Rams. The Rams, he only had 15 DraftKings points. He struggled against the Cowboys. When he played at Dallas, he had 12 DraftKings points. He had 14 DraftKings points at Minnesota. He had 8 DraftKings points at Chicago, 16 at New Orleans. He had 24 at the Chargers, so he did well there. When he played at Baltimore, he only had 10. When he played at Tampa Bay, he did a little bit better there with 25. and at Green Bay he had 12, and at Kansas City he had 14. So you get an idea of how he does on the road in general. But when you're facing a defense like San Francisco, I think we might want to bump Jared Goff's projection down a little bit. Let's give him a projection of 15. So that'll keep him, for the most part, out of our lineups. Brock Purdy, on the other hand, is in a much better situation. The Lions defense is generating about 35% pressure rate, but Brock Purdy completes 56% of his completions, 56% of his pass attempts are completions under pressure. So he does really well under pressure. That's a high rate for a quarterback under pressure. He has 7 touchdowns to 4 interceptions under pressure. On top of that, the Lions like to blitz at a 35% rate, and Brock Purdy has a 70% completion percentage when he's being blitzed. So he does really well there. On top of it, even further, the performance of Brock Purdy, he has a 67% completion percentage against man coverage, and the Lions do about 41% of their defense is man coverage. So really good matchup overall for Brock Purdy. He's probably, apart from Lamar Jackson, like how Lamar Jackson performs against the type of defense that the Kansas City Chiefs run, Brock Purdy's probably set up with the best matchup on the slate, and he doesn't have to face a defense that is anywhere near as intimidating as what Lamar Jackson is facing in the Kansas City defense. So we might want to bump up Purdy to 22. We can see like Purdy, when he has those good conditions, these past couple weeks, he's struggled a little bit. 15 DraftKings points against Green Bay. That was a tough game for him. He was playing in the rain. He doesn't do well in the rain. 17 DraftKings points against Washington. 6 against Baltimore. But you can see some of the upside when he has matchups that he does well in. Against Arizona, he had 25 DraftKings points. He had 25 DraftKings points against Seattle, 32 against Philly, and 29 against Tampa Bay, 23, 24. You see a bunch of 23-plus performances there. I'm not afraid to bump him up to that 23 range. So let's put Purdy at 23 this week. I think that he can pull that off against this Detroit defense. As far as how Detroit's defense has been doing against the quarterback, they're allowing 23 DraftKings points a game. So that helps us justify putting in a 23 projection for Purdy this week. San Francisco has a great matchup all around against the other parts of that Detroit defense. Detroit is allowing 19.9 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, 25.6 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers, and 14 DraftKings points a game to tight ends. All those are great matchups for the San Francisco side. The only place where Detroit is really good is against the run. They're only allowing 16 DraftKings points a game to running backs. So the guy with the worst matchup on the San Francisco side is Christian McCaffrey. So let's bump him down a bit. He's projected way up in my projections. You got him at 27. I'm going to bump him way down to about 20 this week. And the reason I do that is because the Detroit obviously allowing 16 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. But if you see some of these weeks where he had a tougher matchup or a matchup that didn't, he didn't perform well in, Christian McCaffrey had 13 DraftKings points against Washington. He had 19 against Seattle. He had 20 versus Jacksonville. He had 14 versus Cleveland, which is a tough defense. He had 14.8 versus Dallas, another tough defense. So, he's had performances where he didn't perform as you would expect Christian McCaffrey necessarily to. I think that they can hold McCaffrey under 20 points in this one. Let's put him at 19 just to make sure that we're not jamming him in or necessarily phasing him out. He's a $9K salary, so it's going to take a big performance by Christian McCaffrey to make it into an optimal lineup. So I'm going to bet against him having a huge performance against this Detroit defense. That could easily bite me in the ass. But for now, let's put his projection at 19 and see where it takes us when we build our lineups. We'll look at the other side here at Detroit. So if you watched the show last week, I had Aaron Jones. I liked him against the San Francisco defense. And the reason why I liked him, there was a stat that Warren Sharp was talking up about Aaron Jones as far as the matchup that he had against the San Francisco 49ers. The San Francisco 49ers were vulnerable against zone running schemes, like outside zone running schemes. And that is what Aaron Jones was running 41% of his routes outside zone. And it was a really good matchup for him because that's where San Francisco was vulnerable. And so I said to start Aaron Jones last week, and he ended up being, like 19 DraftKings points, which was a huge week for him. This week, I think the closest to that is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs, I want to bump up. I'm going to bump him up to about, San Francisco's defense is allowing 19.7 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. The way that Detroit leans heavily on the running backs, I'm gonna bump that up a little bit, given that they're gonna want to lean on the running backs a little bit more than normal this week. And I think Goff is going to struggle. So they're going to try to utilize these running backs. I think if they're going to be playing from behind, which I'm projecting, then Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be used a lot. They're going to want to use him a lot because the struggles that they're going to have in the middle of the field, maybe AMON-RA is being neutralized or at least slowed down significantly. So I think that Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta are going to be the guys that they kind of turn to, because otherwise, Goff is going to be doing what he's uncomfortable doing, throwing outside. And the outside receivers on top of that are Jameson Williams and Josh Reynolds. And Jameson Williams has really not shown us anything to this point. That's not to say that he can't this week. And Josh Reynolds has been solid for Goff, but he's not a monster when it comes to putting up DraftKings points. So I think that Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta might be the guys that they lean on to make up for that middle of the field disadvantage that they have. So I'm going to bump up Gibbs to about 16. I'm going to keep Montgomery where he's at. The difference between Montgomery and Gibbs, Montgomery's more of a between the tackles grinder, but he does do some of that outside running, but he is not as prevalent in that, but he is more efficient than Jahmyr Gibbs in the outside running that he's done. So I'm not ruling out David Montgomery. I got that information from, I believe, Warren Sharp's article again this week. It was Rich Rebar's article in Warren Sharp's website. So check that out. It's his worksheet. Good information to help us with projecting these guys this week, though. And I like both the Detroit running backs this week. Take a look at the wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think 20 is a bit too high for him, like given this matchup. I do think that given the circumstances, this being playoffs and everything, that Goff might try to force it to Amon-Ra more than normal, like even though it's a bad matchup. So his volume should still be there, but I would project him, given the matchup. We got Detroit. The San Francisco 49ers are allowing 12.6 DraftKings points a game to the slot. So, that is where Amon-Ra is running 57% of his routes. He does run outside a bit. So, you probably rack up 12.6 being above average at the slot, but then we'll give him another 5 points. So let's put him down to about 17 DraftKings points there. Deebo Samuel, he is coming back. Supposedly no restrictions. At least that's what the coach speak is right now. Of course, we don't know what kind of truth there is behind that, but I'm going to leave Deebo at his current ranking, as current projection at 14.2 DraftKings points. With Deebo, the amount of runs that he does, amount of routes that he's running the slot, he's running 30% of his routes from the slot. So he's probably the most heavily, apart from Juwan Jennings, who's the actual slot starter. Debo runs more routes from the slot than Brandon Ayuk. And Detroit is giving up 25.6 DraftKings points a game from the slot. So right now, I like to keep Debo around where he's being projected. Brandon Ayuk is a guy that I'd like to bump a little bit. He right now has a pretty high projection relative to Debo. So I'm going to leave him there, but I want to have more exposure actually than Amon-Ra. So I'm going to put him at 16. I'm going to put him at 17.7. And I'm going to look at Reynolds here. Reynolds is projected at 8 points, 8 DraftKings points. We can see some of his higher weeks. These last 3 weeks, he's got 10.7, 13, 9.4. As far as a comfort zone, Josh Reynolds has a history, like a long history with Jared Goff. They played together in the Rams, and now they're playing together on the Lions. And the 49ers are susceptible, like at most, or the most susceptible to wideouts, giving up 17.7 DraftKings points. So I'm going to bump up Josh Reynolds a little bit here. I'm going to give him 10 DraftKings points. I'm going to leave Williams at 8 because Williams has not shown us anything yet. And Williams is going to be popular even though he has not shown us anything yet. Look at his history. He's had 2 weeks where he scored over 10 DraftKings points, or 3 weeks where he scored over 10 DraftKings points. And given the circumstances, what's on the line and everything, I think that Goff would lean more on Reynolds than Jameson Williams this week. So I'm going to bump up Reynolds. I'm going to leave Williams at his current projection. And you'll see, if they give it to me, they give it to me. As far as tight ends, we're looking at Laporta and Kittle. And as far as these guys go, it's basically the Spider-Man meme as far as the defenses that they're facing. Both defenses are allowing 14 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. So Laporta and Kittle are both set up with pretty good matchups here. And they're both facing defenses allowing 14 DraftKings points a game. So, I like both these tight ends. I like Laporta because I don't think that Amon-Ra is going to have a great game against this San Francisco defense, but I think that is going to force Goff to throw more to Laporta and Gibbs in this game. And I like Kittle because I don't know what Debo's situation is exactly. I like Kittle a lot more if Debo was out, but I do think that Kittle is set up to have a decent game in this one. But if the ownership is too high on Kittle in this game, that is where I think I would shift a little bit more towards Laporta on it. So looking at the actual matchup, Laporta is basically the number 2 receiver in this offense, which is another reason why I like him a lot. Kittle is a little bit more volatile. Like with the matchup, there's too many weapons there on the Detroit side. So, like he's got a good matchup, but so does Laporta. So I think if you're not going to start both of them in the same lineup, then that's where you lean Laporta a little bit, because I have a feeling that he is going to be a little bit lesser owned. And this is the type of slate where you might want to have exposure to 2 tight ends. And I do think that Travis Kelce is in a similar situation. We'll get into him in a minute. As far as the defense goes, or as far as the projections go for these tight ends, let's take a look here real quick. You can see they both have about the same projection, 13.4 and 13.8. As far as the ownership goes, I'm seeing George Kittle probably at about 50% higher ownership than Sam Laporta. And, that puts Laporta to me at a huge advantage as far as a guy that I would want to plug in. They're at the same price too, basically. So I'm going to bump Laporta up to about 15 in this matchup because I want to make sure that I'm getting more exposure to him than I am to Kittle. And if they both end up in the same lineup, that doesn't kill me either. Let's go to the defense. Defense, I'm not touching the projections, and I'm not, taking either one out because, defenses are always a crapshoot. Any one of these quarterbacks that we're seeing today could be vulnerable to the matchup, and any one of these defenses could end up making a play and doing something that makes them relevant in this slate. So let's go to the other game. Same thing I just said, same issue with the defenses, going to leave them all in there. Let's go to the quarterbacks. Mahomes is a guy, he's been struggling to put up fantasy points. His team is getting by mainly on the defense and the running game lately. And Mahomes, he's got Kelce and he's got Rashee Rice lately, and those are really his only weapons. And you can see the last time he put up 20 DraftKings points was back against New England. And before that, he's basically done out of 7 weeks, 7 of his past games, he's only put up 20 DraftKings points once. So I don't think it's justified. And even that one time, you have to go back a few weeks to find his other big game, which was 37 DraftKings points. So I don't think it's justified having him up here at 20. So I'm going to bump him down to 18 like it did last week. That was exactly what he hit last week, by the way. Pretty much what I projected him. He hit 18.5 DraftKings points last week. So I'm going to keep him at that projection again this week. I think that's fair for Lamar Jackson's projection, 23.7. So I'm not going to adjust that. We'll check out and see, what kind of exposure we're getting when I do the lineup builds. But I like that for Jackson. As far as the matchup goes on paper, Jackson against pressure, his completion percentage is right up there with Brock Purdy. He's got 55% completion percentage against pressure. And the Chiefs are generating, 30% pressure. So it's not a ton of pressure that they're dealing with, but it's not. It's probably a middling pressure range that Kansas City is generating. But Lamar has 4 touchdowns under pressure versus 1 interception, so he does really well in that situation. The important thing with Lamar Jackson is how he does against man coverage, because the Chiefs are running man at one of the highest rates in the league. They're running at 53%. And Lamar Jackson has a 63% completion percentage against man coverage and 106 passer rating against man coverage. So that's really good. He is just as good against man coverage as he is against zone. And, that's really good for Lamar Jackson. And the matchup as far as pressure and everything like that, it's nothing to fear for Lamar Jackson. I think it's more of a situation where we got to pick and choose who we pair him with. And that's where it's going to get a little bit trickier. So definitely like Lamar Jackson this week. The issue with Lamar is going to be, like mental stuff. Is he going to be able to keep his composure playing against a high pressure game against the Chiefs, where there's a lot of expectations on the Ravens this year, and we don't want him to be underperforming because he's worried about pressure or anything like that, not only from the defense but also from the situation. So, a lot to say about experience in these situations. Mahomes has obviously a ton more experience. Mahomes has a lot less pressure on him. Mahomes is going to be playing more free, where Lamar Jackson is going to be playing with more weight on his back. So that will be an interesting situation to see how Lamar performs under that circumstance. He did make the playoffs back in 2019 or something like that, where they lost in the playoffs. I can't remember how far they made it. They didn't make it to the championship round though, and they had a lot of expectations that year, and he just didn't live up to the expectations. But he's had at least that experience a few years ago. So Lamar is not a first time in the situation. He's a first time in the conference championship, but he's not a first time playoff guy, and he understands how much it sucks to lose and how long you have to wait to get another opportunity. So I think he's going to have a lot more awareness of what the situation is this time than he did last time. So that puts him in a good spot. As far as running backs, Isiah Pacheco, the Ravens have been lately, I'm looking from week 12 on, the Ravens have been giving up 22.6 DraftKings points a game. That's more than Kansas City has been giving up since week 12. So that gives you an idea of the vulnerability of that Ravens defense to the running back position. And that's why, Pacheco is popular this week. But with Kansas City, there's really three weapons that you want to consider. It's going to be Pacheco, it's going to be Rice, and it's going to be Kelce. So depending on which direction you want to go with one of those weapons, or if you want to go with one of those weapons at all in the context of a 2-game slate, is where you might want to project Pacheco. 15.6 it seems a little bit under where he should be projected. So I would probably give him about 17 in this matchup. If we look at Gus Edwards, I think Gus Edwards is under projected, especially versus Justice Hill. Justice Hill is going to be a popular option this week. He's $700 cheaper than Gus Edwards. I think if you want to get different this week, given the matchup, the Chiefs are giving up 21.7 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. If you wanted to get different, this is where you could do it. And I'm going to bump up Gus Edwards to 13 DraftKings points. I'm going to bump him up to 13, keep Justice Hill at 9. That gives us the 22 DraftKings points that the Chiefs are giving up per game, and significantly bumps up Gus Edwards in a situation where, if we're considering ownership, Gus Edwards is going to be at about 14% versus Justice Hill, which is going to be more than twice that, almost 3 times that, really. So for what? I know Justice Hill has had a few good games recently, but really he's put up 10 DraftKings points against Houston last week, 6 DraftKings points against Pitt. If we expect Baltimore to be playing with a lead or trying to milk the clock in this one, then I would anticipate Gus Edwards being the feature back in this one. And, Gus Edwards, he's put up bigger games than Justice Hill this season, and people seem to be in on recency bias in this situation and preferring Justice Hill over Gus Edwards, but it's really a backfield where any one of these dudes could end up being the guy. Gus Edwards is a little bit more expensive, $700 more, but I'm going to bump him up to 13 there. If we're looking at wide receivers, we got Rashee Rice, Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, Nelson Aguilar, and Rashad Bateman. Now, this is going to be an interesting situation for the Baltimore receivers, because Zay Flowers, I'm guessing Snead is going to be on Flowers. Flowers runs a lot of his routes from the slot, but he's the number 1 receiver there. As far as the slot routes, he's running 30% from the slot, but he's running 70% from outside. So I think that they should be able to take care of Flowers in this game. I'm going to keep him at 12. I think that's a fair projection for him. Rashee Rice is projected at 16.1 DraftKings points. And as far as the matchup against Baltimore, Rashee Rice runs 49% of his routes from the slot, and Kansas City is only allowing 15 DraftKings points a game to the slot. So I tend to lean more towards Pacheco or Kelce than Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is probably my number 3 guy in this matchup. So I'm going to leave Rashee Rice at 16 for now. I might bump him down a little bit. Beckham has looked old lately, and he might have a better matchup. But, if they're focused, if we're projecting Kansas City to be focused on Zay Flowers, that's going to leave us with options of Beckham, who has looked old. And just last week, he only had a couple targets in an important game. He had 1 target last week for 12 yards, and he played a lot less snaps. And the week before that, the game before that, he had 1 target against Miami. He only had 3 targets for San Francisco. He had 10 targets back against the Rams, several weeks back. But, that was his biggest target percentage in a while. He's been really slow. I don't know if he's an injury, a maintenance thing, but even if it was maintenance, you would have expected him to be more used in a playoff game last week. But maybe since they had the lead kind of handled, maybe they decided not to use him as much in that second half. But it was a close game for that first half, and they weren't throwing to Beckham. When you compare that to Aguilar runs a decent amount of his routes from the slot. And the slot, as I mentioned with Zay Flowers, the slot is where Kansas City is vulnerable. The slot is where they're allowing, according to Rich Rebar, 52% of the receptions the completions against the Chiefs for wide receivers, at least, have been from slot receivers. So Kansas City is vulnerable in the slot, and that is where Aguilar is running a decent amount of his routes. And Kansas City's given up 20.2 DraftKings points a game to the slot position since week 7. So Aguilar, I'm going to bump him up a little bit. I probably want him up maybe a little bit above Beckham this week. But I don't want to fade Beckham. So I'm going to bump him up to 7. I'm going to bump Beckham up to 8. And Rashad Bateman is the other guy. He got 3 targets last week, 6 targets the week before that, 4 targets. Like, he's been getting good volume recently. He hasn't done anything with it yet, but Bateman could be on the verge of having a big game. I got him at 6.7, which is, pretty fair, I think. I probably want to have one of these guys. I won't say in every lineup, but in a majority of my lineup, at least, it's just one of these guys: Beckham, Aguilar, Bateman. Because one of those guys is going to have a big game. I just don't know who it is. And that's a gut feel, I feel like one of those guys is going to have a big game. Kelce, I want to have him higher than Rashee Rice. So I'm going to put Kelce up to 17. Now I'm going to put him up to 18 because I want to make sure that he's getting in there more than Rice. He's probably my favorite guy out of the 3 between Kelce, Rice, and Pacheco. So I'm going to keep him at 18. The Ravens are giving up 12.1 DraftKings points a game to tight end position. And I just think in general, Mahomes is going to want to lean on Kelce in this one because they're only allowing that 15.4 DraftKings points a game to the slot where Rashee Rice is running his routes. And Rashee Rice, as good as he's been, he's still young and inexperienced. Mahomes is going to lean on his guy. He's going to lean on Travis Kelce in this one. If they go out, if they get eliminated, he's going to want to get eliminated by throwing to Kelce, not to throwing to Rice. And I just think that is the way that they're going to probably lean on this one. It's not a great matchup for Kelce, but given the option between him and Rice, I'm leaning more towards Kelce. Mark Andrews is in this week. Isaiah Likely. Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely both have basically the same matchup as Kelce. The Chiefs are allowing 12.1 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. So the Chiefs are going to be tough against tight ends. But when you look at Zay Flowers likely to get shut down, I think that they're going to lean on these tight ends in this one. So I probably want to have these guys bumped up a little higher. I don't know how much Andrews is going to be worked in. So I'm going to put 10 on Likely. I'm going to keep Andrews as is. I'm going to put Likely up to 10. So let's look at both these teams here and just check out our flexes and see where we're at as far as the order of players. McCaffrey still at the top there, but that $9,000 salary should restrict having him in lineups. Kelce at number 2. I think I want Ayuk over Kelce, so I'm going to bump him down to 17. I want to make sure I'm getting more Ayuk than Kelce. And let's see, Pacheco is at 17. AMON-RA is I got him at 17. I'm going to bump him down to 16.5. Going to keep Rashee Rice at 16.1. That puts Gibbs down here at 16. So I'm going to bump Gibbs up to 16.5. I'm going to swap him basically with where I got AMON-RA at. I'm going to put AMON-RA at just a straight up 16. So that's going to bump him down below Rashee Rice, which, I don't necessarily hate, but I don't love. So maybe I want to bump up Gibbs to 17.5 and bump AMON-RA up to 17, just so I don't get too much more Rice over AMON-RA when the choice is given. So that's basically what I've done. I've bumped McCaffrey way down to 27. He was at 27. I bumped him way down to 19. Ayuk, I bumped him up to 17.7. I bumped Gibbs up from 14 to 17.5. I bumped Pacheco up from 15.6 up to 17. I bumped AMON-RA down from 20 to 17. I bumped Kelce up from 16 to 17. Rashee Rice, I left him. I bumped Laporta up to 13.4. And I like Laporta more than I like Rice. So I'm going to bump him up to 16.5. Deebo Samuel, I'm going to leave him as is, although I like him more than like any of these guys. So maybe I'll bump him up over Rashee Rice. So I'll put him at 17 as well. Or I'll put him at 16.5. Bump him up there with Laporta. George Kittle, I think he can do better than 13, but I'm going to leave him just because the 49ers guys are always a crapshoot. Gus Edwards, I got him at 13. I bumped him up from 9. Zay Flowers, I'm leaving. Montgomery, I'm leaving. Likely, I bumped him up to 10 from 6. I bumped Reynolds up to 10 from 8.2. Then I got Justice Hill, Mark Andrews, all at the same. Jameson Williams at the same projection. Bumped up Beckham a little bit. And then I bumped up Nelson Aguilar a little bit. So let's see where this takes us as far as the builds go. I'm going to build 150 lineups in that direction, and then I'll start to tinker a little bit with what happens where I want to get certain guys correlated and everything like that. Before I get into that, make sure to hit the like button. Looking for 15 likes to put up a shorter video for my game script episodes. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm 50 short of 500. 500 is my goal for the end of the season. So definitely appreciate help with getting up there. Brock Purdy to Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. Running back with Laporta, Jameis Williams, and Gibbs. We got Pacheco and Rice in there too. Not really, to me, not really enough Ravens exposure. So I may need to bump Gus Edwards up a little bit more or bump down Pacheco a little bit more. Let's check and see where we got our exposure at. We got Gibbs at 90%. We got Pacheco at 81%. We got Edwards at 27%. And then Justice Hill at 6%. Montgomery at 3%. McCaffrey at 1%. So right off the bat, I'm gonna be tweaking those running back numbers. For the receivers, I got Ayuk at 76. That's fine with me. He's my favorite play on the slate. Reynolds, I got him at 68%. I'll probably bump him down just a little bit. Rice, I got at 61%. Jameson Williams, I got him at 37%. Deebo Samuel at 20%. And then Flowers, Bateman, Odell Beckham, and then Aguilar. I got them all around that like 10% range. Got a little too much Flowers compared to these other guys, but I don't hate it since he's so low. AMON-RA, got him at 5%. We look at tight ends. I'm guessing I'm going to have a lot of double tight end builds, which is fine. I got Laporta at 95%. Probably a little too much exposure there. I got Kittle at 35%. Kelce at 30%, likely at 16%, and Andrews at 1%. So right off the bat, I need to take Laporta down a little bit. So let's look back at this. We'll bump him down to 16. I had a little bit more Rice than I'm comfortable with. I'm going to bump him down to 15. I also had a little bit too much. Let's see. A little too much Rice. I'll bump him down to 14. And then these Ravens guys, I'm going to bump them each up a point. So bump Aguilar up to 8. I'll bump Beckham up to 9. And Bateman, I'll bump him up to 8. So let's see what this does for us. So this is, like it's a tweaking process with doing this stuff. You basically tweak until you get percentages that you're happy with, and then you look at the lineups. And when your lineups are not where you like them, that's where you start to make up some rules. This one I got Purdy to Ayuk. I want to have Purdy with at least 2 pass catchers. Like this one I like better, Ayuk and Kittle. We got Pacheco, Gibbs, Reynolds, Laporta. So this is kind of falls in line with exactly what I was talking about. We got Flowers in this one. I don't mind it. Let's see where we're at with our wide receiver percentages. Yeah, Flowers is only at 20% now. which is pretty good. I'm going to see what his overall ownership is going to be on the slate. Flowers is going to be 26%, so I got him a little bit lower than consensus, which is fine because I like him a little bit lower than consensus. We got Aguilar at 21. We got Beckham at 21. We got Bateman at 29. So let's see how our tight ends did, or first our running backs. Gus Edwards, I got him at 21% versus these other guys. I want more Gus Edwards because I really like Gus Edwards in this slate. So I'm going to bump Edwards up to 15, which is significantly more than I had him projected for originally. But I'm going to keep Pacheco. Well, I'm going to bump Pacheco down to 16, which is a little bit more in line with where he was originally projected. I'm going to see where this gets me. This will probably get me Edwards higher than Pacheco, which is where I want to be. And then Gibbs, I should have as my number 2 running back. Let's see. So looking at the running backs now, Gibbs, my highest owned one. I got Gus Edwards right behind him at 77%. I got Pacheco at 43%. If we're projecting Gus Edwards to be 14% owned on the slate, I want to be at least double the slate. Maybe not so much at 77%. So let's bump him down just a little bit. Try him at 14. And we'll see where that gets us. I mean, I can see Gus doing 14 DraftKings points. I mean, that's a touchdown and 80 yards. So we'll see where this ends up landing us. Running back, we got him at 56. I'm more comfortable with that. Pacheco at 55. We're not fading him. We don't have a ton of exposure to him either, though. McCaffrey and Montgomery, you see down there. I'm going to bump McCaffrey. I'll bump him back up to 20 because I don't want to fade him completely. But I do think that he's in a difficult matchup. I think, I don't want to bump him up higher than 20, basically. But you can see from where I bumped him down was 27. I think 27 is like a super high projection for him in this matchup, I think. And I think we can get different pretty easily by bumping him down. So that gives us 5% McCaffrey. Gives us 93% Gibbs, 55% Pacheco, 54% Gus, 3% Justice Hill, and 1% Montgomery. Now, Montgomery is a guy, if you think that Detroit is going to beat San Francisco, Montgomery makes a lot more sense. I just think that the Lions are going to be playing from behind based on, the matchup I see for Jared Goff. It's not just because they're huge underdogs in this. It's because I don't like the matchup for Goff in general. I'm going to get rid of some of these older builds. So let's look at the wide receivers. We got Ayuk at 90%, Reynolds at 63%. I don't like having Ayuk at 90%, like just with how volatile that San Francisco offense is. Anybody could go off in that offense. So I'm going to put him down to 17. I'll give him the same as AMON-RA, just to bump him down just a little bit and let those lineups build. And we'll see where that takes us. Takes a minute for these things to build, so make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button on the YouTube page while we're waiting for this. And here we go. All right, quarterback first, Purdy and Lamar Jackson. Not enough Lamar Jackson exposure. I'm going to go in there and tweak it again. Let's get Lamar up to, I think he can get 26 points against Kansas City. It's a tough matchup for him, but Lamar is a guy that can hit 26 pretty easily. He's done it so many times this year. He's had some bad games too. So, I don't want to go crazy with the projection on him, but I don't want to have 7% exposure to him either. So let's look at that. It gives us 59% Lamar and 41% Purdy, which I don't hate. Let's look at where that puts us for running back. Gibbs still at 95% Gibbs, 61% Gus, 53% Pacheco, and 1% McCaffrey. As far as receivers, we got 77% Ayuk, 74% Reynolds, 31% Bateman. So you can see it's given us the cheap wide receivers, which I don't even hate this week because it's like the expensive wide receivers have bad matchups. And I'd rather pay up at other positions. If we look at the original build, we can kind of see that Rashee Rice and AMON-RA were pretty high up there. Ayuk was down. So yeah, I don't hate going with the cheap wide receiver direction. I feel like the good wide receivers have bad matchups, and the cheap wide receivers have okay matchups. So that's why it doesn't really bother me. I want to pay up at other positions this week. The tight ends, tight ends make a lot of sense to go double tight end this week. I think a lot of people are going to go in that direction. I think you can get different by not going in that direction. And if we're looking at our defense, we got about 45% Chiefs and 45% Baltimore. Which makes sense to me. So let's go ahead and look at these lineups and see the correlation. We got Lamar. I don't necessarily want to stack Lamar with more than one pass catcher, because if Lamar takes the game over, then nobody else is going to be scoring a lot of points. That's another reason why I don't mind going cheap at the receiver there. Gives us a stacking partner for Lamar. Let's see, we got Pacheco and we got Gibbs in this one. Don't like that one necessarily. Like Brock Purdy to Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle. I'm probably going to limit that to, maybe max 2 pass catchers. Although, I wouldn't put it past the 49ers to be able to get 3 pass catchers there, especially if McCaffrey's not involved. So Brock to Samuel, Ayuk, and Kittle, running it back with Gibbs and Laporta. And then in the other game, we got Gus Edwards and Rashad Bateman. So I don't hate that. And we also got the Ravens D. I don't hate that. So let's make up a rule here. If we're going to do Purdy, we want Debo, Ayuk, McCaffrey, and Kittle. I want to have at least 2 of these guys if Brock Purdy is my quarterback. At least 2. So that's going to be my Purdy rule. If I have Lamar, let's see, I want to have Bateman, Beckham, and Flowers Bateman, Beckham, Flowers, Aguilar. I think that's it for those receivers. I don't want to have more than 2 of these guys in a lineup. So I'm going to leave that at that rule. And actually, you know what? I'm going to add Likely and Andrews on there too. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna leave that like that because I don't mind having two of these guys on a lineup. So let's try that out and see where that takes us. So that's going to build for us. Let's see where that takes us. So it gives us Lamar, Bateman. I think that's the same lineup. A little too many Chiefs for me. We got Purdy to Samuel Ayuk. That's the one that we liked before. We got Lamar with Gus Edwards to Beckham. We got Gibbs and Reynolds. We're running it back with Ayuk. Running this Lamar stack back with Kelce. And then we got Laporta in there too. So maybe a little too much Detroit in that one. This one we got a little too much Detroit too. I'm going to make a rule. I don't want more than 2 of those Detroit guys in a lineup. So I'm going to put Laporta, Gibbs, Montgomery, AMON-RA. Laporta, Gibbs, Montgomery, AMON-RA. Reynolds and Williams. Max 2 of those guys in a lineup. Just because I don't think Goff is going to be able to support, three of these guys. So let's try that. See how that helps to narrow things down even more. Just a tweaking process. Like you just go until you start seeing lineups start to form the way that you like it. Another way you can do it, you can go into, they have a stacks option. I prefer to do it like the groups way, but you can do stacks option 2. Problem I have with stacks option on this optimizer, I'll get into in a second. We got Purdy to Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle. Running it back with Gibbs and Laporta. And then we got Gus Edwards, Rashad Bateman, and Chiefs D. I don't hate that one except for the Chiefs D, but defenses, I'm not worried about correlation on defenses in a 2-game slate. But I do kind of like that one. I like Purdy, Edwards, Gibbs, Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, Laporta. How's that one different than that one? Debo, Ayuk, we got Laporta. Oh, they put Aguilar instead of Bateman in this one. That's another thing. I mean, you set it up so that you can rotate your guys in there. Lamar to Aguilar and Bateman. Pacheco and Gibbs are the running backs. You got Ayuk in there. You got Kelce in there, Laporta. I wouldn't put the Chiefs defense against my quarterback, though. So this one would be a little bit more in line, except there's, if I'm putting Lamar and Gus in there, I don't want to have 2 receivers from Baltimore. Let's see. I'm going to go into those groups again. And put this Detroit. I'm going to go into that Baltimore one. I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to use a change here. I'm going to go only one with Gus Edwards. So let's try that. Yeah, because I don't want to get two receivers in there with Gus. And that's just a personal preference, because if you have two receivers in there with Gus, I mean, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense, because it means that they're getting more points off the running game. And there's not going to be a lot of points to spread around to that passing game at that point. At the same time, I don't want to phase Gus out. Let's see what that did to my Gus exposure. 64%, so I still got a decent exposure to Gus. This one we got Purdy, Gus, Jahmyr Gibbs, Beckham, Rashee Rice. We got Purdy to Ayuk and Kittle. Rice in there, Laporta and Kittle. Ravens D. I mean, this one's pretty good. That one's a pretty good balanced one. This one we got Lamar, Gus, and Beckham. We got Gibbs and Reynolds running it back with Ayuk. We got Kelce in there as the Kansas City run back, and then we got Kittle as well, and the Ravens D. Like that's a lineup that I like. You know, like that's where I'm starting to see lineups built the way that I like them. This one we got Lamar and Gus. We got Beckham. We got Pacheco and Kelce. And then we're running it back, you know, obviously with our Baltimore stack. I don't like the Chiefs D in that one. I'm going to have to put a rule. I don't want Chiefs D against Lamar. Let's put Chiefs D. We want 0 exposure with Lamar. Let's try these again. Seen a couple lineups though, so I know I'm getting a lot closer with tweaking these. The stacks option that you can do, the only thing I don't like about it is you have to assign percentages to all your stacks. So you're like forcing the stacks, you know, like which I don't necessarily like. And you can, you know, like it makes it more difficult when you got like the entire 100% of your lineups assigned to stacks. It makes it like more difficult to try to get variation in your stacks. So let's go look at this. We got Purdy to Ayuk and Kittle. We got Pacheco, Rice, and the Chiefs D with Bateman. And then we got Gibbs and Laporta. That's not a bad lineup if you like the Chiefs. We got Purdy to Ayuk and Kittle. We got Edwards in there, which I like. We got Gibbs in there, which I like. We got Beckham. And then we got Laporta. Like this one I really like. I really like this lineup. Although I'm not a huge fan of Rice over those other guys, but I do like the build there. We got Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Josh Reynolds. And then running it back with Ayuk and Kittle. And then we got Beckham. And we're running back the Baltimore stack with Kelce. So this one's a pretty good one. Already favorited that one. We got Purdy to Debo and Ayuk. We got Likely in there and Bateman. Running it back with Pacheco. And then on the Detroit side, we got Gibbs and Laporta. So yeah, I mean these builds are more builds that I'm starting to like. You know, I'm going to be focusing on these Gus Edwards lineups first, I think. So let me take a look at these Gus Edwards lineups that I got, because I want to make sure that I'm getting a decent exposure to Gus Edwards. I'm going to see a Brock Purdy with Gus Edwards. So Brock to Ayuk and Kittle, running it back with Reynolds and Laporta. On the Baltimore game, we got Gus Edwards and the Ravens D, which is a good correlation. And then we got Pacheco and Rice. I don't hate that, but I think if I got the Ravens D, I don't want two Chiefs in there. This one we got Chiefs D versus two Ravens. This one's a little bit more balanced. We got Purdy to Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle. Then we got Edwards versus Pacheco. We got Williams and Laporta running back with that San Francisco stack. And then we got Chiefs D. So that one, that one makes a little bit more sense. Let's see, find one with the Ravens D instead of a Chiefs D with that Gus Edwards build. Purdy to Edwards and Pacheco. We got Flowers in there as well. Purdy's going to Ayuk and Kittle, running it back with Reynolds and Gibbs. And then we got Ravens D in there as well. Like, that's a pretty good one. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of what I'm thinking for the slate. Basically, I won't go too much deeper with it, but a lot of the optimizer for me, the way that I build is tweaking like that, tweaking those projections, trying to get it so that it matches more with how I envision like the slate playing out. I think that Brock Purdy is going to have an easy time against the Detroit defense. I won't say easy, but I think he's going to have a much better matchup than Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes. I think that Lamar Jackson is the other quarterback that I like. I think him and Purdy are my favorite quarterbacks on the slate. And I think that as far as ownership on those guys, I mean, they're going to be the most popular guys in general. If you want to go a Mahomes route, I don't hate the Mahomes route, because anytime that you can get a discount on Patrick Mahomes as far as ownership, then you have an opportunity to take it. Just do what I did with tweaking your projections and stuff, and maybe bump up Mahomes higher than where I had him, and that'll get you more Mahomes exposure. As far as the passing weapons, I think that the tight ends are all in play this week. I think that the wide receivers are going to be tough this week. It's going to be tough to narrow down the best ones to start, because none of them really have good matchups, and all of them are kind of in offenses that are spread around a lot. So it's hard to figure out which ones to go with. Where they're condensed is Rashee Rice. Kansas City has gone from the most confusing wide receiver room to figure out to probably the easiest now, because it's Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce as far as the passing game for Kansas City. So a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Rashee Rice this week, even though he's got a bad matchup. So I'm going to tend to go away from Rice this week, even though he seems safer with the bigger workload in the more condensed offense now. But I don't like Rashee Rice this week. I like Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk is in a situation where it could be Ayuk, it could be Samuel, it could be Kittle, it could be McCaffrey. Like, there's so many weapons on that San Francisco offense, it's hard to narrow it down. I'm just leaning towards Brandon Ayuk in this matchup, and just going to hope that I'm right about it, basically. Debo should be much, much lower owned than Ayuk, but if you want to get away from Ayuk and go Debo, don't have a problem with that either, especially if the ownership discount's going to be there. But as the news reports are coming in that Debo is, he's going to have no limitations and stuff like that, maybe if you can get an ownership discount on Debo over Ayuk, maybe that makes Debo more interesting. As far as the Detroit side, Amon-Ra is the go-to guy for Jared Goff, but he's in a tough matchup. And I think that people are going to turn to Williams, but I think that Reynolds is going to be a guy that Jared Goff leans on more in this situation. And I think Laporta is going to be a guy that Goff is leaning on in this situation. Laporta should have pretty high ownership as well. So, you're not going to, I'm not telling you anything that people aren't already thinking. So, tight ends, like there's probably going to be a lot of 2 tight end builds. That's probably going to be a popular way to go this week. Maybe if you go 2 tight end builds, maybe look at Andrews and Likely, because those guys are going to be the least owned, and they're going to be, decent matchups against Kansas City. I'm not saying play them together, but I'm saying put one of those guys maybe in your lineup with Likely. Likely is going to be the least owned of those tight ends. So maybe, maybe go a little bit more Likely over Andrews. Andrews is coming back from injury. He's more expensive than Likely, and we don't know what kind of use that Andrews is going to get. So, he's not a home run by any stretch, but both those guys are lesser owned than Noah Gray, which is nuts to me. So those Baltimore tight ends are definitely in play this week. Gus Edwards is a guy that I like, who is way under-owned. He's going to be, like almost a third of the ownership of Justice Hill, which is, which I don't think is justified. I think that Gus Edwards is more than, 30% likely to score more points than Justice Hill this week, or however that math works out. Gibbs, I like. Pacheco, I think, might be overowned, and Christian McCaffrey is not in a great matchup. So you saw my matchups, I don't have a ton of McCaffrey exposure. And then, like I said, with quarterbacks, I do like Purdy and I do like Jackson. So hopefully that gives you guys some direction or some thoughts on the 2-game slate, and maybe experiment a little bit with the optimizers. And hit that like button, get me to 15. Hit subscribe, get me to 500. I'm a 50 short of that number. And so sign up for Underdog using promo code SEEK, SEEK. They're going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit. And watch those game skipped episodes. And I will be putting up a bunch of Super Bowl content when these championship round is over. So keep an eye out for that. And I'll see you guys.